Good evening, and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum at the Institute of Politics. My name is Alia Marrero Alatar. I'm a junior here at the college studying government and history and literature, and a member of the JFK Junior Forum Committee. Before we begin, please note the exit doors, which are located at the park side and the JFK Street side of the forum. In the event of emergency, walk to the exit closest to you and congregate in JFK Park. Please now also take a moment to silence your cell phones. And now join me in welcoming Harvard College undergraduate Antonia Melina Salame.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the JFK Junior Forum at the Institute of Politics. My name is Antonia Melina Salame, and I'm a sophomore at the college, as well as a member of the John F. Kennedy Junior Forum Committee. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Jon Favreau, an American political commentator, podcaster, and the former director of speechwriting for President Barack Obama. Favreau joined Obama's Senate office in 2005 as a speechwriter and went on to become the president's chief speechwriter from 2009 to 2013. He helped to craft some of the most memorable addresses of the Obama presidency, including, but not limited to, inaugural and State of the Union speeches. Following his time in the White House, Favreau co-founded Crooked Media, a progressive media company, and became the co-host of the award-winning podcast Pod Save America, which has become one of the most influential platforms in American political discourse. His work spans political strategy, media, and civic engagement, blending his experience in government with his commitment to shaping public conversation. We have two special guests joining us to moderate tonight's forum. The first is Nancy Gibbs. Nancy is the director of the Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy, and the Edward R. Murrow Professor of Practice, Press, Politics, and Public Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. Before coming to Harvard, she had a 3-decade career at Time magazine, where she was the first woman to serve as editor-in-chief. She is the co-author of 2 New York Times bestsellers, The President's Club and The Preacher and the Presidents. In addition to Nancy, we are being joined by the JFK Junior Forum Committee's very own Director of Operations, Iris Cheng. We'd like to thank the Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy for co-sponsoring this event. And now, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Jon Favreau and our 2 wonderful moderators.
Hey, you all. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back, John. First time since
2013. Everything's turned out great.
Perfectly.
We got to start with the news. It's Category 5 news cycle again. You want to handicap the shutdown for us?
It's a good question. I don't know how long it will last, but I do think, here's my view on it. I think that healthcare is a worthy issue for the Democrats to make the shutdown about. I think that if their demands for extension of the Affordable Care Act subsidies and a reversal of the Medicaid cuts are met, like, it would absolutely make a huge difference in the lives of millions of people. And I also think those happen to be wildly popular policies. I personally would not vote to fund a government that the president is using to go to war against half the country. And I think that we are seeing, whether it's ICE raids that are sweeping up American citizens and people with legal status, and ICE agents assaulting people, detaining them without ability to contact lawyer or family for days. The tariffs most likely are illegal. We're all paying like higher taxes on most of the shit we buy now. And I think that he's going after his enemies, right? He's not going to stop with Jim Comey and Letitia James and all the rest. He has a whole list. And to me, I think that you say, I'm not going to fund that. And Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the White House. And if they would like to change the Senate rules and get rid of the filibuster to pass the budget, they are free to do that. But I don't see why Democrats should be giving them the votes for that. And I think it's important that Democrats then make the case to the country, since more people will be paying attention to the shutdown, that this is why they're not going to fund this government.
Yeah, how's that part going so far?
Yeah, I mean, this was my anxiety about the shutdown is like, as Don Rumsfeld said, you go to war with the the Democrats you have, not the Democrats you wish you had. And so, to paraphrase.
Want to name names there?
Yeah, so it's like, we're already into, Donald Trump does an AI video of Hakeem Jeffries wearing a sombrero, and then, Hakeem Jeffries gets mad and he fights back and is like, say it to my face, and then there's another AI video somewhere for that, like fat JD Vance on the couch or something that's going around. And it's like, okay, are we communicating the message we want to communicate, which is that our most fundamental values and freedoms and rights as Americans are under assault right now? And this president who ran on lowering the cost of living and making sure more things are affordable and bringing down inflation, none of that's happening. In fact, inflation's gotten worse. And he's added this tax that's likely illegal. Like, is that message getting out? Not so far. And I don't think that's entirely the fault of Democrats, because I think we are in, as you all know, we're in an information environment where it's very difficult to get a cohesive message out in any kind of disciplined way. But it does require a level of discipline that I don't quite know that we have right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the topic of messaging, you and your colleagues at the podcast started during a time of immense outpouring of, attention to the progressive cause after the 2016 election. But, since then we've seen this kind of podcast wave almost die down a little bit. People are tired, hosts are burnt out. What has kept you going, and what has kept listeners coming back to your podcast even after this initial outrage against Trump has subsided?
I think what keeps me going is a sort of a burning rage about what is happening to the country and a debilitating addiction to politics. So that's me, and also just I joke about the rage, but it is a frustration born of hope that there has to be a way to fix this, and I refuse to give up on that, and I refuse to disengage or just let it happen or go live my life. I just can't do that. Yeah. And so I want to keep at this until either it gets better or someone doesn't let me keep doing it. So that's what keeps me going. As far as the audience, I mean, we're actually quite lucky that our podcast audience, I think it dipped a little bit, I would say, in 2024 prior to, there was this debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump that happened.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, so it dipped a little bit then, but then from the debate through now, and it dipped a little bit after the election, between November and when Trump took office, but from January to now, certainly, it is at its as high as it's ever been. And we've grown our YouTube audience. We just hit 1 million subscribers on YouTube, and
Congrats.
thank you. And we just started that, trying to build that, focusing on building that audience in recent months. So people are coming back, and I do think there's churn, right? So I think there's some people who left because they're like, it's too much. I got to take a break from it, and then there's new people coming in who are just paying attention for the first time.
That's really great to hear. It's great to hear that there's a prospering of some podcasts even in this really difficult media ecosystem. I'm kind of wondering, there are so many, extremely high profile, almost infallible conservative podcasts out there with huge audiences. Do you ever feel like you're fighting an uphill battle against them, or are you kind of targeting a different demographic of Americans altogether?
It's a great question. I don't think about them a lot in terms of trying to beat their audience. The way I look at audience like I look at the electorate. I think this is my background as a political strategist and organizer and someone who's worked in politics for a long time. And so the way I see things, and same with my co-hosts and co-founders, is there is a big country out there of people who, some of them are paying attention to the news a lot, some of them are paying attention once in a while, and some are tuned out. Mm-hmm. And what can we say on every podcast that helps inform people about what's going on in the world, provide some entertainment, Because if all you do is tell people how awful everything is every day, people, even if it may be right, people are not going to keep listening. And also the conversations that I have about politics with my friends, some of whom are now in our company, and family and everything else, like, we talk about how bad everything is, but even privately, we sort of leaven that with humor. It might be gallows humor, but we try to do that. Sure. And so I think when you're thinking about building an audience, you have to make sure that there's this balance between like analyzing the news, giving people good information, and also giving them some space to laugh a little bit. And then I think we really try to make sure we are inspiring people to actually take action and to participate in politics. And I think that's what probably separates us from a lot of other media companies, right or left, is like we don't hide the fact that we are trying to get people who are listening involved in politics, whether it's running for office, whether it's volunteering in an election, donating money, whatever it may, even talking about it with friends and family, even like spreading awareness of what's going on in the news with other people in their lives. So that we're trying to think of like the whole country that way, and so we don't try to think about like, oh, the right-wing audience or slice and dice people into like demographic categories. We just we're talking to everyone.
Got it. That sounds great.
Have you, in light of the intensity and the actual violence in the space that we've seen, has that changed the way you think about your role, your work, your safety?
Yeah. I will say in the days after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, I think for the first time started thinking about safety and security. I mean, we'd always thought about that at our live shows. It honestly was not something that worried me that much. Then it was. Certainly after that happened, that's just natural because it is what we do all the time. But that sort of faded away after a day or two. And then I think I was really grappling with the reaction. And I had expected that the reaction from the right and from the government, unfortunately, would be to use the assassination as a pretext to crack down on free speech and to take actions that they had been planning to take anyway, and were very open about that. I mean, Stephen Miller said, the last text Charlie Kirk sent me was like, you got to go after the far left groups, And so this was clearly a plan they had in motion that I think the assassination accelerated. So I was very concerned about that. And then, and look, I first saw this after the United Healthcare CEO was killed by Luigi Mangione, but there were obviously some celebrations of violence, justifications for violence that I saw coming from some on the left. And I have not had any interactions with anyone who celebrated or justified the violence, but I have talked to people who, and people I know who listen to the show, people in my life, who will say, it's bad that he was killed, and obviously I don't condone violence, but, and, words are also violence, and what he was doing was hateful, and I don't know why we have to spend a lot of time condemning this, because I think what we need to do is just fight those hateful ideologies. And while I very much agree that, what Charlie Kirk said, which is, by the way, very in line with what comes from the White House and the people who run the country. It's not like he was outside of that mainstream within the Republican Party right now, unfortunately, at least within the Trump administration and Trump supporting Republicans. And even though, we do have to argue with them and debate them, but we have to draw a line in violence, at political violence, and we have to make that very explicit, because violence does beget violence, and there are a number of studies where when you ask people, do you support political violence, you get a certain percentage, and then when you tell people that when you ask people to guess the percentage of the other side that supports political violence, almost always it is higher than it actually is. Yep. And then when you tell people, oh no, actually only 8% of people or 5% of people on the other side of the political divide than you support political violence, then On the left, people's support for political violence goes down, and vice versa if you were doing it with the right versus the left. So it is important for leaders, people in public life, whether you're a politician, whether you're a podcaster, whether you're someone on social media with any kind of following, by denouncing violence, by condemning political violence, you reduce the support for violence across the country. And I think that is incredibly important. And I also think that the progressive project, the liberal project, the democratic project, is that we can live together in peace and prosperity without violence. Like, that is the project. And so we should be wanting to make sure that our supporters do not engage in violence, do not think violence is an option, more than anyone else, because that is the fundamental basis for democracy. We do politics so that we settle our disputes at the ballot box and not violently. Because countries that don't do that, that's how civil wars start. And so there's an act of political violence, there's an assassination, and what can happen, and what has happened in other countries, is that snowballs, and suddenly, it's like the Spanish Civil War, and neighbors are killing neighbors, and without even knowing why. And so I think that is a very serious, hard line in the sand that we have to draw. And we also have to redouble our efforts to persuade people. Not necessarily like Charlie Kirk, we're not going to persuade him, but he went to a lot of campuses where people showed up. Liberals, people who were not necessarily right-wing or liberal, but just sort of in between, had different kind of political views, and he tried to convince them. And did he do it with lies? Did he do it with hateful language? Yeah, of course. But he was there, and he did it. And the only thing that we can do is try to persuade people otherwise. That is democracy. Like, that is what politics is supposed to be. And so I think we have to make sure we do that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that really insightful response. I have also been really reflecting on the conditions in which political violence is created, and a lot of that is, the news, the media kind of intentionally cultivates this environment of hatred and vitriol. I'm just curious, as an intermediary between politics and people, you're kind of helping them interpret politics. How do you avoid over-sensationalizing the topics that you discuss?
Yeah, this is what I think about almost all the time when I am preparing for the pod, when we're picking topics, and when I'm speaking. And it's hard when you're speaking because the point of if you want to make the podcast good, it's supposed to be like a conversation, right? And so you do not want to continue. We're not politicians, so you don't want to keep self-editing yourself all the time. But I do try to make sure that when we are speaking, A, we are giving people factual information. B, if we don't give people factual information because someone made a mistake, we correct that mistake. Because I don't expect anyone on any side of the political spectrum to be perfect with always having the right information. When we make fun of the right, which we do quite a bit, is it the kind of humor and mockery that people can say, oh yeah, and laugh with it? Or is it something that's going to get people to be like, oh, this is so bad that you have to take an action that's more than just voting, organizing, whatever. And so I do feel a responsibility to make sure that as much like I said earlier, I do believe we are facing an authoritarian threat. I do believe Donald Trump and his administration are engaging in actions that not only violate the Constitution, but violate what it means to be in a democratic society. I believe that very deeply. And I think that the way that you fight that is to persuade more people to think differently and to not find his vision of America more appealing. Because again, I think that's how you do politics. So to the extent that I'm saying things and doing things and writing things that contribute to making sure people understand that, great. And to the extent that I am not, I will sometimes be like, that was a little too much. Maybe I'll pull that back. Because I do think about it quite a bit.
You've taken issue in that fight for the future of democracy with the way some of the country's leading news organizations think about that role, as have some of your colleagues. Dan Pfeiffer said before the election about the New York Times, they do not see their job as saving democracy or stopping an authoritarian from taking power. And when the editor of the Times was asked about that, he said, basically, democracy is just one issue among many. It's not the top priority on voters' minds. And that to say that the threats of democracy are so great that the media is going to abandon its role as a source of impartial information, that's essentially saying the news media should become a propaganda arm for a single candidate because we prefer that candidate's agenda. That seems like a pretty obvious false choice, but I wonder how you answer is it the job of journalists to save democracy and navigate the objectivity challenge?
I think the challenge for journalists, and I think what might have bumped people at the New York Times and the editor and other journalists who get this kind of criticism, is because the Republican Party under Donald Trump seemed to be anti-democracy. Therefore, if we are pro-democracy, we are siding with the Democrats, and it is not our job to elect Democrats. It is not their job to be cheerleaders for the Democratic Party. And I do agree with that. But at some point, you have to look around and say, like, we are in a different environment than we used to be in. And things change. And maybe they change slowly, but they have changed. And what are our fundamental values as journalists in America? Forget about the parties. Forget about the Democratic Party. Forget about the Republican Party. Forget who's in power. What are our fundamental values? Our values are that we should be free to say what we want to say, to believe what we want to believe, to report on people in power honestly, accurately, to challenge power, to speak truth to power, and to make sure that also this is a country where journalism and the active reporting on politics is allowed and is not punished. And those should be principles that are not Democratic or Republican principles or liberal or conservative. And I think you can report and write journalism in a way that reflects those fundamental values. And if the right then says, oh, you're just being propagandists for the Democrats, they are free to say that. But if you have these values that would be the same values if a Democratic president decided that they wanted to attack democracy, then those are your values and you should follow those values. And I don't think that, I think that sometimes they confuse like being objective. Like objectivity is important, but you can be objective about partisanship and objective about parties. You don't have to be objective about sort of the fundamental values that the country operates on. I don't think that's not objective. That's not objectivity. That's just being an American.
Yesterday, Gallup released its latest findings about trust in the press, and it's all-time low.
Yeah.
The number of, like 28% said they had a great deal of trust. Do you have a theory about that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that part of that is the information environment, a big part. I mean, we've talked about the parties in politics, and obviously there's it was, looking at that chart, right, it's down to an all-time low because Democrats have started to lose trust in the media as well. Republicans have been on a decline for quite some time. I think when you broke that out by party, Republicans are down to like 5 or 6%.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was pretty low. Independents are quite low as well in the 20s, maybe matching the overall number. And then Democrats, starting in 2015, you see that it goes down for Democrats, right? And so I think part of it is just the political moment that we're in, and Trump, and what Trump has done to the country. I also think that the way we consume media has changed so that it's easier not to trust the media because A, there's a lot more misinformation out there, and so it's harder to know who to trust. I think that it has always been the case in media that, if it bleeds, it leads, right? And so sensationalism that you're talking about, and sort of stories that make people angry, afraid, like those are always going to travel more. But social media, algorithms have supercharged that. And it used to be that we had our own bubbles, and like you were in a liberal bubble of media or you were a conservative bubble of media. Now we all have our own. The media environment is not like fractured, it is individualized now. We have individualized media for each person. And everyone has their own algorithmic drip that they're just consuming news in their feeds. And I think that the competing sources of information, the fact that not everyone is getting the same information and then interacting with each other, that is going to lower trust in media because you don't know if what you're consuming is real half the time. And if you're a New York Times reader and they're doing a fantastic job fact-checking and rigorous reporting and all the standards that the New York Times have, but you like a podcaster or a certain creator on TikTok, and that's how you get your news, and they're spending all of their time attacking the New York Times because the New York Times didn't do a good job with some story or they had a bad headline, you're going to start to say, oh, maybe I don't trust the New York Times, right? And so I think that is an important dynamic, which is why I was probably more of a media critic when I left the White House because I was in the White House, and when you're in the White House, whatever the case is, you're in a foxhole, you think the media is out to get you, right? That is just Democratic, Republican presidents throughout time. So I left the White House as a bit of a media critic. Now, even though it would be advantageous for our audience to get more audience to just be attacking the New York Times and the Washington Post all the time, I am cognizant of the numbers that you just mentioned and try to be if I'm going to criticize the New York Times, the Washington Post, or Politico, I want to make sure that it is accurate criticism, a fair criticism, and that I don't impugn the great reporting that a lot of these outlets really do.
Absolutely, and I want to pick up on this note that you made about the political moment and kind of bring in something that you've been talking about in this conversation and just throughout your career, which is the power of humor in politics. And we've seen this all-time rise in high-profile political violence. We've just had an air of solemnity in the air when it comes to politics. Everything seems more, serious now more than ever. We're walking a finer line. Is there still room for genuine humor in politics, or should we be changing the way that we use humor in this field?
I think there has to be room for humor. One of the reasons that those of us in politics and in media and progressive media, I'll speak for us, do this is because we want a world where people can live lives of joy and laughter. And I think that if we lose sight of that, and we are always angry and afraid all the time, then we are going to lose something about ourselves and why we are doing the work. I also think that fear and anger are really powerful motivators for people. I think we've seen that with social media and algorithms as well. I think Donald Trump and his movement have found that as well. I think that there are times when people should be angry and people should be afraid. But I also think that the way to bring people into the political process, to get new people to come and help save democracy and help fix politics, is to welcome people in with joy and humor. Because what I think some of us in politics who do this often forget is most of the people in the country are not paying close attention to politics, the vast majority. And maybe they dip in and out, but if, and I like to think about this as if you're just having a conversation with someone on the street. If I just meet someone and I'm trying to get them to be involved in politics, and I'm just meeting them, I'm not going to start the conversation by saying, did you see what Donald Trump did? He's so crazy, he's a dictator, he's ruining democracy. I wouldn't say that because the person would think I'm crazy and then they would just be on their way. I would try to talk to them about their lives, their interests, try to issues that they actually care about in politics, where they stand on those issues, and then sort of go in that way. And I think humor is a big part of that. I think inspiration is a big part of that. And so I do think that there has to be a place for humor. I also think, by the way, other authoritarians all around the world and throughout history really do not like being mocked. And the reason they don't like being mocked is because mockery and humor are a powerful, powerful tool. Because they maintain power by keeping people afraid of them. And if all we are of Donald Trump is afraid of him, then he wins. And I do think it's very important to be able to mock our leaders. And Donald Trump knows that too, which is why he went so hard at Jimmy Kimmel, why he's trying to get Seth Meyers and Jimmy Fallon fired and all the rest of them, because he knows that once he's mocked, that once people can make fun of him, that he's not seen as strong. He's not seen as unbeatable. So I think humor is very important.
We've talked a lot about messaging strategy. Are there Republicans who you admire in the way they approach their messaging?
Like Trump supporting Republicans? That's most of them now, right?
Yeah.
Probably. I think what some people in that party have done that is smart is realize that the Republican Party that I grew up with, that we ran against in 08 and 12, of low regulations, more tax cuts, complete free market, like Paul Ryan sort of Medicare voucher kind of, that is not popular with many people in the country. And there are a lot of working class, non-college educated Americans who used to be Democrats, who are now Republicans. And part of it is the Republican Party under Donald Trump's move towards restrictionist immigration policy, for sure. But I think at some point, like J.D. Vance noticed this, and Josh Hawley noticed this, and Republicans like that people who are just working for a living, 2 jobs, can barely make it, but who might be with the Republicans on social issues and immigration are very much not with the old Republican Party on economic issues. Now, what have they done in response? They just passed a gigantic tax cut for rich people, but they've at least started to realize in their messaging that this is important. So, right now, the fight is over. The government shutdown fight is over healthcare. You are not hearing Donald Trump and Republicans saying, Americans don't need the government to be involved in making healthcare more affordable. What they're saying is, Democrats want to give $1 trillion to illegal aliens, which is just a lie. But they're going there instead of, I think that an earlier version of the Republican Party would say, no, this is government. We don't want government involved in healthcare, and that's why we shouldn't lower healthcare costs. So I do think that is smart. I think they are hobbled by the fact that you still have probably majorities of Republicans in Congress who still believe in the old religion of the Republican Party, which is why you got that big tax cut and why they can't seem to do anything else. And I think some of them are just more full of it about their populist turn than is reality, at least in the way that they're legislating. But I do think that is a smart direction for them to head.
Yeah. I just want to pivot quickly to a little bit of a lighter subject.
Sure.
As I'm sure many here may know, you have a second podcast offline where you discuss, all things digital hygiene, how to live a happy and healthy life in a world that's increasingly more and more online. And I think that's super applicable to Harvard students. As a Harvard student myself, I'm curious if you could distill these episodes into a few main messages to our group here today. What would you say?
The main message is I spent a couple of years giving people advice that I have not taken myself. I think it is impossible to tell people, just don't use your phones or put the phones away or get rid of the phones. I don't think that is a practical way to go through life. What we try to do on offline is give people sort of the information they need to make good choices about how online they are, and when they are online, when you're navigating, knowing when you're being pulled into a rabbit hole, knowing when your emotions are being manipulated, so that at least you're aware of the dangers of just sitting and scrolling your whole life. I do think that finding time to put your phone away, to be with other human beings, is incredibly important. I think that social media and the internet, but mainly social media, has given us the illusion of connection and the temptation of connection. So you go on because you think, all humans have a need to not be lonely and to be around other people and to connect with other people. And so you go on hoping for that connection. And maybe there was some real connection when this whole thing started. And people, when Zuckerberg was here and people are just trying to connect on Facebook, maybe that was genuine connection. People were meeting with people. Again, that was a little different because people were meeting online and then they would meet in real life offline. Or you would organize for a campaign online and then there would be meetups in real life on a campaign. So the real organizing would take place person to person. And now that doesn't happen. And the idea that the connection that we have on social media, no matter what the platform is, can be a substitution for real human connection, where we argue with each other in person, where we debate each other in person, where we joke with each other, love each other. Like, it's not the same thing. And I think we have to recognize that it's not the same thing. And so when we are online and we are seeing an image of other people, many of them strangers, that the algorithms are feeding us, one thing to think about is this might not be who those people are in real life. And everyone is much more complicated and much more human than their avatar or their account suggests. And if anyone takes anything from the podcast, I hope it's that.
So for all the aspiring podcasters here, what is the best part of your job, and what's the worst part?
The best part of my job is when we sit in front of the microphone and do the pods. It really is. And I have not gotten sick of it. I do not get sick of it. I get to have a conversation about politics with some of my best friends in life. And I love doing that. And then on offline, I get to sit and talk to people I find fascinating, brilliant, frustrating, people who I think I can learn from. And I prep for those conversations a lot. I do a lot of reading. That work is really hard. But without a doubt, when I have that conversation, and it's a really fascinating conversation, that is the highlight of my day. Yeah. The hard part, I don't say the worst part. The worst part, I think, running a company, very tricky. We hired a CEO a couple years ago. Highly recommend that. That's much better. Don't want me managing people. So that's tough. I think the last year has been tough with just the political climate. And I mean, it's tough for everyone who doesn't like the fact that Donald Trump's president, but the way I think about it is our goal, what we're trying to do is make this democracy a little stronger, make the country a little better, get more people involved in politics. And to the extent that people don't want to be involved and that everything is too bad and too awful and it makes them want to turn away, like that eats at me. So that's the tough part of the job.
Yeah, absolutely. In just a moment here, we're going to actually open up the floor to those aspiring podcasters, and we're going to take your questions. So there are 2 mics here on the floor and then 2 in the loge boxes. So please just start to line up and introduce yourself, ask a brief question. Before we get to that, though, I want to quickly ask you, let's say I'm an aspiring podcaster. I'm 20-something years old. I'm a college student, a college graduate, and I'm looking at this media ecosystem, and it's so kind of fragmented, oversaturated. I want to tap into it and build an audience, but I don't know how to start. So can you give me like one tangible, actionable piece of advice, like, go buy a mic stand, and also one more, I guess, philosophical, motivational piece of advice?
Yeah. The mic stand thing, I don't know I'd be good at that advice, because we barely got this thing together when we started. I think when Tommy and John Lovett, Tommy Vitor and John Lovett and I started the company, we were sitting around our kitchen table. My wife Emily is here in West Hollywood and had no idea how to start a company. And I remember we went to the Bank of America down the street, and we were like, we'd like to open an account for our company. And the woman was like, okay, do you have money to put in the account to open it? And we're like, no. We will go to the ATM and we will be right back. So that was us starting a company. But the motivational, sort of more philosophical advice I would give is, because it is so saturated, what do you want to say? Like, what do you want to say that you think people need to hear that they are not already hearing? And because I do think that you get moved into this space where you're like, okay, how do I build the audience? What's going to bring the, like, when we started, we did not think we were going to build some big media company. Or at least we thought that would be cool if we did. But what we really wanted to do was, you know what? We left the White House. We thought we were done with politics. But now this political crisis is taking place, and we got to keep at it. And we don't hear anyone else talking about it. in a way that I think would actually reach people and grab people. And we have all this stuff to say.
Yeah.
And so we just did it. And I think if you have something to say that you think that other people aren't saying, that you're passionate about, that you feel could make a difference, that is the best way to start a podcast or sort of any media venture at this point.
Yeah, that's an incredible piece of advice. Thank you, Jon. We're going to go to some student questions. I think we'll start here at this mic on the floor.
Nice to meet you. I'm Rishabh. I'm a huge fan of the pod. I was not a part of your December dip in listeners, by the way. So in your conversation with Pete Buttigieg, you talked a little bit about AI. And this is something I've been grappling a lot with because we're dealing with a lot of short-term challenges and suffering. But it sometimes feels like we're sleepwalking into sort of an unprecedented level of social, economic, even political disruption from this technology. So I'm wondering, how do you think Democrats should communicate, or if they should be communicating at all about these challenges, given the sort of short-term issues we're facing?
Yes, it's a great question. And I do think Democrats need to be talking about it. I think one of the reasons I asked Pete about it is he had written about it before as an issue that he wants to be talking about a lot. And I was really glad to see that and glad to hear that, because I think the way that sometimes Democrats have viewed technology or tech companies, and especially, we've had an interesting relationship where we were friendly to Silicon Valley and tech back in the Obama era, and now, thanks to Elon Musk and others, very much not. But I think that it's not just a question of what regulations we need, but if artificial intelligence is truly going to change humanity, which I know is a grandiose statement, but the more I look into it, I'm like, yeah, this is a big deal. And I don't say that in terms of just, the apocalypse is going to end the world, though possible. I say it in the way, and this is because of offline, the way that social media has changed us and changed our individual well-being and the well-being of the country and the world and how we interact with each other. And I think that artificial intelligence in some ways is going to just supercharge what happened with social media. And there's going to be a whole bunch of new questions it raises that we haven't really grappled with from social media. And so I think when we talk about it, it's not just what's your AI policy as a Democrat? What regulations do you have? But how do you see the world changing? And how do we respond to that change as a party and as a country? And so I wouldn't think of it as just a technology or a Silicon Valley thing, but I would think about it as, how is this going to change democracy, politics, the economy, the way that we relate to each other? And I think, it's early days, and economists and others will point to well, if you look at all the numbers yet, it doesn't show that it's displacing a lot of jobs just yet. It's not entirely surprising, because it's still quite early, and people are still figuring out how to use it and how to work with it, especially older people, right? And so I don't think we've even begun to see the potential job displacement. I don't think we've begun to reckon with what it is going to do to the way that we interact with one another, to the relationships we have, to the loneliness epidemic that we have been suffering from for quite some time, that was supercharged during the pandemic. And misinformation, all of the issues that we're dealing with. And so I think that if I was a Democrat running for president, I would have quite a bit to say about the kind of society that AI could lead to, and the kind of society that we want to build, with AI as a tool and not something that controls us or lets things spin out of control. And to me, it's a bit of a do-over from social media. We didn't have these questions with social media. Social media started and we were it's amazing, it's great, we're all connecting, we didn't ask these questions. I am hoping that now sort of the backlash to what we're dealing with on social media forces us to ask some much harder questions this time around with AI. I think the big challenge is we have a federal government that is currently closed, cannot even stay open. So the idea that we are going to come together and figure out regulations and policies, it does worry me, and especially because AI is moving so fast, but I think it has to be a big part of what Democrats talk about.
Yeah. Thank you for your question. Let's go up here.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to talk to us. This has been wonderful. My name is Chris. I'm a junior here at the college studying government and also a member of the Forum Student Committee here. I wanted to ask a little bit more about social media and particularly how it pertains to the youth population. I think there's an undeniable movement in the podcasting space right now that is sort of the intersection of youth entertainment and now politics, where you have a huge wave of neoconservatism where people who have celebrity status in the youth, people like Joe Rogan, Logan Paul, are now taking intensely political stances and sort of shifting their podcasts from somewhere of a more fun social media space, talking about a different topic, into politics, an area where they might not have as much expertise. As someone who occupies the opposite end of the podcasting space, that being liberal ideas, I'm just wondering, one, how does it feel to occupy that space? Two, are there any strategies that you have for sort of marketing towards youth? And three, if there's sort of any mindset or point of view that you wanted to come in here today talking to an audience of primarily college students, of sort of how to not break through to youth, but how to put into balance this wave of neoconservatism?
It's great questions, and we think about it all the time. We thought about it sort of long before the 2024 election when this became a thing. And people have the audiences they have. We can't wish away their audiences, right? And so if Joe Rogan is an extraordinarily influential podcaster who has decided to start talking about politics, even if he says some things about politics that aren't correct or that are correct but we just don't agree with, then the best way to handle that is to debate Joe Rogan, have a discussion with Joe Rogan, go on Joe Rogan's show if you can, and try to make the case for our ideas. And I do think there was a movement in the party in the Democratic Party between 2017, 18, 20 through 2020, where it was if a podcaster or someone in the media said something that we disagreed with, or even said things that we thought were offensive, then going on that, platforming them, or going on that show is platforming them, then it's somehow that was off limits. And I think that has started to turn around because I think it's not a productive way to do politics. I don't think you gain anything from that. Clearly, we did not gain anything from that. Clearly, it did not help, and in fact, it only hurt. Joe Rogan liked Barack Obama. Joe Rogan liked Bernie Sanders. And the idea that people can't go on his show just because he's expressed ideas or said things in the past that they don't like is just, again, it's not just not the greatest political strategy, it is also antithetical to democracy, which is what we're trying to do here. So what we think about, and we think about reaching in people, is, I was saying this earlier, I think that sometimes Democrats overthink it and treat young people and now young men as anthropological studies, and it's be careful of approaching the young man in the wild. Do not cancel him. Just step gingerly around him. And it's funny because I was saying this to some students earlier, we spent so much time as a Democrat over the last 10, 15 years hearing about how Democrats talk down to people in the middle of the country or tend to act like anthropologists about people in the middle of the country, rural America, all that kind of stuff. And I don't think I fully experienced how unproductive having that public conversation was until now it's men, younger men. I will call myself younger. Sorry, you can laugh. But it's why is everyone talking so much about us and not just talking to us? And I think it's incredibly important to and for Democrats to do this as well, to have conversations with young men and young people where you're just listening. John Della Volpe is here. He has spent quite a bit of time doing this with focus groups, with research, and I know one thing that John and I have talked about on the pod is the importance of just actually listening, to what's on people's mind. And I've done this. For this other podcast I do called The Wilderness, I did focus groups, and I did focus groups with young people, and the focus group is just like, what's on your mind? What do you care about? What issues are most important to you? And how do you think the government is handling them? How do you think politicians are handling them? And you sort of take your lead from the audience and from the people that you're talking to, as opposed to going to them and saying, hello, I am from the Democratic Party. I would like you to join me. I just think it's more effective to do a lot more listening. So that is one thing that we think about. It is hard. It's not like you can turn on a switch or there's a special strategy where it's like, now we're going to get the young people. I do think that sometimes, I see this with Democratic politicians, like appealing to young people is not just trying to act like you think they act, right? Like there's like some of the shit that Democratic politicians tweet, and they're like, like, girl, and you're like, what do you? And it's like Mark Warner, And you're like, what? Who thought that was a smart way to do this? It's like, well, the younger staffers did, but that the younger staffers don't actually think that that's a good way to do that. You think that like the politician probably said, tell me what the youth like. Young people that work for me, and the young people are like, well, this is a meme, and this is something that's trending right now, so if you do this, you will get the young people. And like, that's just not the way the world works, because we're human beings. And so I do think like, who is extremely successful and well-liked among young people? Bernie Sanders, right? Bernie Sanders, quite old, doesn't really do social media, doesn't really like understand what's the special trends, doesn't try. Gets huge crowds all across the country. Because Bernie Sanders, whether you like him or not, whether you believe in his policies or not, he believes them. He knows what he wants to say. He believes it deeply, he's believed it deeply his whole life, and when he speaks, that comes across. And if you don't like what Bernie Sanders stands for, he's okay with that. He'll go on to the next person. He doesn't try to like figure out exactly how to reach people in different demographics and audience. He just says what he believes. And I wish a lot more Democrats would do that.
Yeah, absolutely. We just had Senator Sanders here. So as a youth, I can personally agree that I was very compelled. We'll go up here next.
Hi, my name is Kirthi. I'm a senior at the college. Thank you for being here. I think I approach young men as an anthropological study, so I'll work on stopping that.
It's not a great study, I will tell you.
So I heard your answer to the question on misinformation, and I found it compelling. I think there's one thing I kind of want to push you on, which is that there's a lot of people today that just don't believe numbers, or are skeptical of numbers, or think numbers are being warped in a way to promote a political ideology, which in my interpersonal experience has been very difficult to deal with, because you could say COVID vaccine saved X amount of people, and then somebody just says no instead of a counter-argument. So how have you sort of dealt with that in your professional career, and is that, as I believe, something that's changed over the past couple of years, and how do we fight it if it has?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think it comes down to what is most likely to persuade people? How are we persuaded? How do we change our minds? Some of us change our minds based on facts and statistics and numbers that we're exposed to. But a lot of us, all of us, are also persuaded and compelled by emotion and storytelling and people who try to show us empathy and try to help us understand them, where they're coming from, their life experience, by tapping into your life experience. And so maybe you can't convince someone that the vaccine will save them because you give them all the studies and all the experts in the world, but you can say, look, I get where you're coming from. I get that you are concerned about this, that, and the other thing. I get that there's a lot of misinformation out there. Let me just tell you from my experience, I had those concerns too. I'm worried about things too, but like, I had my kids do this. I love my kids. Gave them vaccines like other people, and it's just, my doctor said it, right? Like, and I do think trying to sort of build that sense of empathy with other people can sometimes be more persuasive, or at least cut through a lot of the misinformation in a way that I don't think we do enough of. I don't think it's a surefire way. I think there's some people who are just going to believe what they want to believe, and you're not going to be able to change their minds. And I do think back to our social media conversation, one of the challenges with social media and having a perspective of the political world that is based on what you see on social media is that you tend to believe there are just more extremes on each side, and that those extremes are representative of where most people are in the world, and that's just not true. And so when you get off social media and you talk to people, you are definitely still going to encounter people who are quite different from you politically, but you're also going to encounter a lot of people who have, frankly, very odd and complicated, to you, political views. And those people are gettable, and they're open to persuasion, just like I like to think that all of us, like I'm open to persuasion, right? Like I have very strong political views, but I am very willing to be convinced and to have a conversation with someone where they try to convince me, and I try to have an open mind about things. And so I think that if we approach people that way, as opposed to just sending them numbers and figures and all that, like we might have some more success.
Let's do one more right here.
Hi, I'm Kelly. I'm an MPP student here at the Kennedy School, also a big fan, and I have a background in campaigns, so I have a messaging strategy question.
Sure.
It seems like there's been a growing push against overly tested messages and like a feeling that a lot of the leaders in the Democratic Party don't know how to talk like human beings anymore. And so I'm curious what you think the balance is between using all of the great research and data we have to figure out what the best way to say what you believe is and being just like truly off the cuff authentic.
This is a great question. First of all, thank you for campaign work.
Thanks.
I think about this a lot and have had a lot of experience with this because I am sort of maybe the rare message speechwriting person who is like such a data nerd and loves polls and loves research. And I'll just tell you about the experience I had on working for Barack Obama and the campaign and then in the White House. There is on one side, Barack Obama, who very much wants to say what he believes, good trait in a politician, we love that, and wants to speak from the heart and just sort of, and also like, you know, sometimes speak in long paragraphs, sometimes like get into nitty-gritty policy details, right? He is who he is and he wanted to speak that way. And then there are all the campaign pollsters and strategists who would do all the testing and everything like that. And I was the in-between. And I was the sort of the mediator because I loved our strategists and loved our pollsters. They will all tell you that. But when they would give me a line that said, this line tests the best, like, okay, well, Barack Obama is not going to want to say this line. But I take your point that there is something behind these words that is popular and resonant with people. So I will then figure out, with Barack Obama, a way to express and communicate the sentiment that you're finding in the polls, but in a way that is authentic to the person that my job is to write for. And so that is how I approach politics, like when I was a speechwriter. I think the challenge now is, and Dan Pfeiffer always says this, that Democratic politicians are like reading the stage directions, which is like you get the poll and you get the research, and I now feel like giving it to Democratic politicians is like giving like matches to a baby. You're just like, no, like, don't say it exactly like that because that sounds phony and weird. And like there is sentiment in the country that supports a growing middle class. If you say growing middle class a million times, like we are human and that's not gonna really land with people as much. If you ask people, do you support a growing middle class? They're still going to say yes. So that sentiment is correct. But to just go out there like a robot and say middle class 15 times, maybe it's helpful in an ad that someone's gonna get for 30 seconds, but that's not a good way for a politician to talk. I mean, and it got so crazy that I think by the time we got to Biden, it was like, I believe in a bottom-up, middle-out economic strategy. I'm like, how many fucking directions is that? That is a crazy, who understands what that means? That is nuts. It's crazy that we got to this point. I could go on forever. Like the language the Democratic politicians continue to use is not the way that people talk to each other. It is not the way they talk to each other or talk to people when they are off mic or off camera. So it is unclear why, when they get on mic or on camera, they are suddenly talking that way. Because we live in an information environment where most people see influential people talking on their screens who are just talking like themselves, and then you see a politician talk and you're like, oh, you're an alien, because that's not how everyone else in my feed is talking. And again, I think this is like, it's not just the polling, it's like, there's this recent trend where, and I don't know where it came from, where Democratic politicians are all now like swearing all the time, because like Trump was vulgar, and they think that like swearing is more authentic and cool. And look, if you're someone who swears, great, swear. I do it on the pod all the time. I try to tone it down a little bit because now we have a son who can listen to it. Sorry. But if you don't naturally swear, then don't just like drop F-bombs into your random discussion about Medicaid cuts. What are you doing? So that's my hobby horse.
On that fantastic note, as much as we'd love to keep you here for an extra hour, we do unfortunately have to wrap up the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah.
Thank you. This was fun.
Thank you.
Thanks for the excellent moderation.